Billionaire CEO breaks down after poor girl hands him her only ring. What's inside shocks him. It was raining. Not the soft kind, the kind that soaks through your socks and makes the whole world feel cold. A little girl, no older than 5, stood on the corner of a crowded Chicago street. Her coat was 2 sizes too big. Her cheeks were red, and in her tiny hand she held a gold ring. She stepped in front of a man in a tailored suit, the kind of man who never stopped for anyone. "Sir, I don't want your money," she said softly. I need to save my mommy. Please, take this." He took the ring, uninterested, until he saw the name engraved inside. Jessica M. Moore. His face froze, his knees buckled. And for the first time in 10 years, the billionaire cried. It wasn't the rain that woke Sophie that morning. It was the sound of her mother coughing. Again. Jessica Moore had been sick for weeks. Fever, fatigue, no medicine left. In their tiny apartment, no bigger than a storage unit, 5-year-old Sophie padded across the cold linoleum floor, holding a glass of water with both hands. She didn't cry. She never did. "Mommy," she whispered, "are you getting better today?" Jessica smiled weakly. "I just need rest." But Sophie had overheard the truth. The free clinic said her mother needed real treatment, medication they couldn't afford. There was no one left to ask. No friends, no family, only each other. Sophie went to her backpack. She thought about drawing a picture to cheer her mom up, but when she reached for her crayons, something tumbled from the shelf. A box. Inside was a ring. Gold, with a tiny blue stone, and engraved inside, Jessica M. Moore. Sophie had never seen it before. She stared at it, then at her sleeping mother. And without a word, she made a choice. Rain pattered on the sidewalk as Sophie walked alone through the city. No umbrella. No plan. Just that one ring in her pocket, and hope clutched in her heart like a secret. When she reached the downtown square, she spotted him. A man in a dark gray suit, watch worth more than her whole street. He looked important, but also tired, like he hadn't smiled in years. She stepped in front of him. "Please, sir," her voice shook. "I don't want to steal. I don't want to beg. Just take this ring. It belonged to someone kind once. I need to save my mommy." He looked down, annoyed, but when he saw the name engraved inside, he dropped his briefcase and whispered the name like it was a ghost. Jessica, the ring that made a billionaire break down. She stood there in the rain, not crying, not begging, just holding out her hand, small, trembling, soaked, with a gold ring resting in her palm. "Sir, give me anything. I just need to save my mommy." Mark Sullivan almost walked past her. Another rainy morning, another stranger in need. He had a meeting in 20 minutes and $1 billion deal waiting. But something about her made him stop. Maybe it was the way she stood, still unshaken, or the look in her eyes that no 5-year-old should carry. He took the ring out of reflex, barely glancing at it, until he turned it under the gray light. Inside the band, a name was engraved. Jessica M. Moore. The name that once meant everything to him. The name he hadn't spoken in years but never really forgot. Mark's breath caught in his throat. His heart cracked open, raw, trembling, silent. The rain fell harder, but he didn't move. He looked at the girl again, the same wavy brown hair, the same stubborn little chin. "What's your name?" he asked, voice uneven. "Sophie," she said quietly. "My mom is Jessica Moore." It felt like being struck by lightning. The age, the name, the resemblance. He crouched down, slowly, meeting her eyes. "Can you take me to her?" he asked, barely breathing. The streets blurred around him as he walked hand in hand with Sophie. Tiny fingers wrapped in his fragile but firm. She led him to a rundown apartment, 4th floor, peeling paint, broken elevator. And when she opened the door, his whole world shifted. The apartment was painfully modest, a worn couch, cluttered shelves, barely enough room to turn. "She's in there," Sophie whispered, pointing to the bedroom. Mark's heart pounded in his chest. He stepped closer to the door, hesitated, then knocked softly. No answer. Sophie didn't wait. She pushed the door open. "Mommy, I brought someone. He knows you." Mark stepped inside and saw her. Jessica. She was lying on a thin mattress, too pale, too still. Her hair clung to her forehead. Her body looked too small beneath the blanket. But it was her. Even sick, even silent, it was her. She blinked, slowly focusing on his face. Marked. His name came out like a breath. A memory. A wound. He stepped toward her. And nothing else, no empire, no meetings, no money, mattered anymore. The woman he never stopped loving. Jessica's voice barely reached him. She looked so different. Thinner, paler, her cheeks sunken, lips cracked. And yet, it was her, the woman he had once imagined a future with. He moved closer, setting the ring gently on the bedside table. Sophie looked between them, confused but trusting. "This man? He knows you, Mommy." Jessica tried to sit up, but she was too weak. Mark instinctively reached forward. His hand brushed her forehead. She was burning up. "You need a doctor," he said, already pulling out his phone. "No." She coughed violently, trying to push him away. "We can't afford." "I'll pay," Mark cut in, "and it's not up for discussion." He turned to Sophie. "Sweetheart, pack a small bag for your mom. Just a few things." The girl nodded and ran out of the room, leaving them alone. Jessica's eyes welled, but she looked away. "Why are you here, Mark?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "You could have walked away." He didn't answer right away. How could he explain that the moment he saw that ring he knew? He had never really left. In the taxi, Jessica lay in his arms, barely conscious. Sophie sat beside him, gripping the teddy bear she never let go of. Jessica opened her eyes once. "Why? Why did you come back?" Mark met her gaze. But instead of answering, he looked at Sophie. It's a small miracle between them. And silently, he made a vow. This time, he wouldn't walk away. Chapter 3. The Girl Who Made Him Stay. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and old hope. Jessica was admitted immediately. Mark barely had to speak. The staff moved like he was royalty. But his mind wasn't on power anymore. It was on her. He sat in the cold waiting room, not as a CEO, but as something far more terrified. Beside him, Sophie leaned her head on his arm and fell asleep. He didn't move. He didn't check his phone. He didn't think about stocks or strategies. He just stared at the girl, this tiny, stubborn force who had offered a ring to a stranger in the street and brought him home. Was it possible? Could she be his? When Sophie woke up, he handed her a sandwich and a juice. She accepted it shyly, then tore it in half. "I'm saving this for Mommy," she said simply. Mark couldn't speak for a moment. This child, 5 years old, already understood sacrifice better than most adults. "You can eat it all," he managed to say. "I'll get more for your mom." She looked at him, suspicious. "Are you sure? It costs money." He smiled faintly. "I'm sure." Later, as she colored in a borrowed sketch pad, she talked. About her mom working 3 jobs. About blanket forts made of couch cushions and candlelight. About dreams that didn't cost money. Stories about cloud kingdoms and Sunday park picnics with ice cream. Mark listened. Not like a man used to being in charge, but like someone trying to remember what mattered. "She cries sometimes," Sophie whispered, not looking up. "Says it's just dust. But there's no dust at night, right?" Mark swallowed hard. "No, sweetheart, there isn't." She told him about a photo in a drawer, a man and a woman smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower. "Do you know him?" she asked. Mark's heart stopped. "I think I might," he whispered. She tilted her head. "During the day, do you have kids?" "No," he said, then added quietly, "Not that I knew of." Sophie looked at him for a long time, then gave a sad, wise smile. "I never had a dad either." Mark felt the words hit deep. He wanted to say it. Everything. The truth. But he couldn't, not yet. Not without Jessica's blessing. So instead, he said, "I think your dad would be very proud of you." She nodded. "Mom says that too." And Mark, who had built towers from concrete and glass, realized he had never built anything as precious as what sat right beside him. Chapter 4: The Memory of Us. Jessica opened her eyes to the sterile white ceiling and the faint hum of the hospital monitors. Her fever had broken. Her body still ached, but her mind was clear. She turned her head slowly, and there he was, Mark Sullivan, sitting in the corner chair with a paper coffee cup in his hand. His hair a little more gray than she remembered, his eyes a little softer, but still him. "What are you doing here?" Her voice came out thin and sharp. He stood, unsure whether to move closer. "Sophie found me," he said quietly. "She tried to sell this." He placed the ring, her ring, on the table beside her. Jessica stared at it as if it were a wound reopened. "She shouldn't have," she muttered. "She said you were sick," he added, softer now. "She needed money. She thought the ring could save you." Jessica closed her eyes. The tears stung, but she fought them back. "That doesn't explain why you stayed." "You had pneumonia," Mark replied. "I couldn't just walk away." Jessica scoffed. "You've done it before." The silence was heavy. He didn't argue, didn't offer excuses. Instead, he sat back down. "I was young," he said finally. "And selfish. And stupid." "You cheated," Jessica whispered. "And you lied." "Yes." A pause. "And I lost everything because of it." Jessica looked at him then, really looked, saw the pain behind the carefully composed face, the regret in his posture. But she had her own pain, her own years of loneliness. "You don't get to show up now and act like a savior," she said, voice shaking. "Sophie is my daughter." Mark looked at the door where Sophie had just left with a nurse. "She's my daughter too, isn't she?" Jessica hesitated. She could lie, protect her world. But what would be the point? "Yes," she said finally. "She's yours." Mark looked like he'd been punched in the chest. 6 years of silence, 6 years of never knowing. "I've missed her whole life," he said hoarsely. Jessica's eyes burned. "And I've lived every moment of it, alone." "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," Mark said. "Just a chance to be a father, to make it right." Jessica turned her head, tears finally falling as her voice cracked. "Just the treatment," she whispered. "Nothing more." Mark nodded, but in his heart he already knew. He was never walking away again. Chapter 5: A Promise in the Waiting Room. Mark spent the entire night in the stiff plastic chair of the hospital waiting room. Sophie had fallen asleep curled against his arm. He didn't dare move. He just watched her, this little girl with eyes like Jessica's and questions too big for her age. When the smell of toast drifted from the cafeteria, Sophie stirred. She rubbed her eyes and whispered, "Mommy?" "She's still asleep," Mark said gently. "The doctor said she's getting better." Sophie nodded, but didn't smile. Instead, she glanced toward the door of her mother's room. Then, with small fingers, she tore her sandwich in half. She wrapped one piece carefully in a napkin and slipped it into her coat pocket. "What are you doing?" Mark asked softly. "Saving it," she answered, "for Mom. She's always hungry when she wakes up." Something in Mark shattered. This tiny child, so small, so brave, was more generous than anyone he had ever known. They sat quietly as she ate, swinging her legs from the chair. Mark cleared his throat. "Do you go to school?" "Pre-K," she said proudly. "Mom works when I'm there." "And what does your mom do?" "She cleans houses, 3 different ones. At night, she sews things to sell." Mark felt his stomach twist. Jessica, the woman he once dreamed of building an empire with, was now scrubbing floors and stitching buttons to survive. "And on weekends?" Sophie's face lit up. "We go to the park. Mom brings a blanket. Sometimes, if we have money, we get ice cream. And at night, we make a blanket fort and she tells me princess stories with candles." Mark had spent years in penthouses, drowning in luxury. But suddenly none of it seemed to matter. Not compared to blanket forts and candlelit stories. "She sounds like an amazing mom," he said. "She is," Sophie replied. "But sometimes I see her cry." Mark leaned forward, heart pounding. "She says it's just dust in her eye." But there's no dust at night, right? No, Mark whispered. There's not. And there's this photo, Sophie added, of her and a man. They're smiling a lot. I think she loved him. Mark's breath caught. He knew exactly which photo. Paris, the day he almost proposed. Do you know who the man is? He asked. Sophie shook her head. Mom doesn't talk about him. Then, suddenly, do you have kids? Mark's heart dropped. No, he answered. Sophie tilted her head. Then, you're alone? I guess I am. She looked thoughtful. That's sad. Mom says we don't have much, but we have each other. And that's what matters. He looked at her. This little soul who saved half a sandwich for her mom, who built castles out of nothing but love. Your mom is very brave, Mark said. Sophie nodded. She says we have to be strong when things get hard. Mark swallowed the lump in his throat. Then, softly, what about your dad? I don't know him, Sophie replied. Mom says he left before he knew about me, but she says he's not a bad person, he just chose a different path. Mark blinked away the tears. Jessica, she never poisoned their daughter's heart against him. And would you want to meet him someday? He asked. Sophie nodded. Just to know what he's like. Mark couldn't speak, so he just squeezed her hand. And in that moment, with a child's wisdom and a father's silent vow, a bond began to form, delicate but real. September 6, the drawing that changed everything. It was a quiet afternoon in the hospital. Jessica was asleep, her breathing slow and steady. Sophie sat cross-legged by the window, flipping through an old magazine. Mark entered gently, holding a paper bag. Hi, Sophie, he whispered. She looked up, eyes curious. I brought something, he said, pulling out a new sketch pad and a box of colored pencils. For you. Her mouth opened slightly, her small fingers reaching toward the gifts like they might vanish if she blinked. For me? She asked, glancing at her mother as if waiting for permission. All yours, Mark smiled. No need to share. Sophie's eyes narrowed slightly, testing his sincerity. I like sharing, she said solemnly, but I don't like when people break the crayons. Mark laughed softly. I promise I won't break any. They began to draw. Sophie's hands moved quickly, confidently. A house, a garden, flowers. What do you like to draw? He asked. Big houses, she answered, with swings and lots of windows. He tried drawing beside her, but his attempt was clumsy. Yours looks funny, she observed without judgment. I was never very good at this. That's okay, she shrugged. Mom says we don't have to be good at everything. We just have to try. Mark watched her. Each word another window into a life he had missed. A life shaped by bedtime stories, kindness, and sacrifice. Do you work a lot? She asked suddenly. Yes, he replied. Too much. Like Mom, she nodded. Sometimes she falls asleep while sewing, but she never forgets my bedtime story. Mark looked at Jessica's sleeping figure. He noticed the tiny calluses on her hands. Proof of battles fought in silence. You know, he said, your mom is the strongest person I've ever met. I know, Sophie replied simply. They drew in silence for a while. Then Sophie asked again, quietly, Do you have kids? Mark paused, his chest tightened. No. Sophie gave a small, sad smile. I never had a dad either. Her words cut deeper than any accusation, but she wasn't bitter. Just honest. Mom says he left before he knew about me, but sometimes I wonder, she paused, would he think I'm nice? Mark reached for words but found none. So he nodded. I think he'd think you're wonderful. Sophie smiled. That's what Mom says too. Then she pushed a few colored pencils toward him. You can be my friend, since you don't have kids. Mark stared at the colors, blue, green, brown, his favorites. Thanks, Sophie, he said. I'd love to be your friend. She grinned and picked up her pencil. When she was done, she turned the sketch pad around. Mark stared. It was a house, bigger than before, with flowers, a tree with a swing, and 3 figures standing in front. A girl, a woman, and a man. A family, he asked. She nodded. An imaginary one. Mark felt something crack wide open in his chest. He cleared his throat. Can I keep this drawing? You can, she said. We can make more tomorrow. He smiled, a real one, the kind he hadn't worn in years. Tomorrow, and every day you want. Across the room, Jessica stirred. She saw them together, leaning over a drawing, laughing. She closed her eyes before they noticed, and a single tear slipped down her cheek. The wall she built for 6 long years? It had just begun to crumble. Chapter 7. The Tower That Melted Her Walls. Jessica gripped the IV stand with one hand as she walked slowly down the hallway. The doctor had said she needed to move a little to rebuild her strength. But her mind wasn't on her body. It was on the laugh she had just heard, echo down the corridor. Her daughter's laugh. She followed the sound. There, in the waiting room, she saw them. Sophie was on the floor, surrounded by building blocks. And beside her, Mark. He was kneeling, balancing a red block atop a wobbly tower. Oh, Mr. Mark, that'll fall, Sophie giggled, waving her hands in protest. You're the expert, Mark laughed, raising his hands in surrender. Jessica stood behind the wall, unnoticed, watching. Something about the way he looked at her daughter, not just present, but attentive, made her knees go weak. The tower rose higher and higher until it nearly touched Sophie's outstretched arms. Careful, Mark said, gently holding her waist as she tiptoed to add another piece. We don't want you ending up in a hospital bed like your mom. Will Mommy get better soon? Sophie asked, suddenly serious. She will, Mark said softly. She's strong. Just like you. Jessica felt something crack inside her. She had built her life around protecting Sophie from disappointment, from pain, from Mark. But watching them now, the nurse passed by and saw her. Need help getting back, Miss Moore? Jessica shook her head, finger to her lips. Just watching my daughter for a moment. The nurse smiled and moved on. Jessica stayed frozen in place. Then, without warning, the tower collapsed, blocks tumbling in every direction. She expected Sophie to cry. Instead, the little girl burst out laughing and threw herself into Mark's arms. Let's build a bigger one. Mark hugged her tight, and in his eyes, Jessica saw it. Love. Pure, unconditional, wordless love. The laughter rang down the hallway, sweet and unfiltered. Jessica's tears slipped down her cheeks. Not because she was sad, but because, for the first time in 6 years, she wasn't sure if she had been right. 6 years ago, she had vowed never to let Mark Sullivan back in. She told herself he was incapable of change, incapable of putting anyone above his career. But what if she'd been wrong? What if the man in that room, on the floor, surrounded by toy blocks and giggles, wasn't the same one she walked away from? What if he could be the father Sophie deserved? Back in the room, Mark and Sophie had started again, building something stronger. A new base. More solid. More balanced. Jessica remembered how, when she found out she was pregnant, she stood in front of the mirror with trembling hands, telling herself she could do it alone. She did. But watching them now, she wondered at what cost. Sophie stepped back from the new tower to admire it, tripped, and began to fall. Mark caught her instantly. I've got you, he whispered, holding her tight. Will you always catch me when I fall? Sophie asked, looking up at him. Mark's voice shook, but he didn't hesitate. Whenever you need me, Sophie, I promise. Jessica gasped, pressing her hand to her mouth. The tears were silent now, but they didn't stop. Because that tower wasn't the only thing being rebuilt. In her chest, among the cracks and scars, something was stirring. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but something dangerously close. Hope. Chapter 8. The Truth at the Door. The hallway was dim, quiet except for the distant hum of the elevator. Jessica leaned back against the wall, one hand still on the IV stand, her heart pounding louder than the silence between them. Mark stood in front of her, not the confident, polished man she once knew, but someone visibly changed, hesitant, older, maybe even softer. Sophie is my daughter, isn't she? He asked again, his voice low, pleading. Jessica looked away. She had dodged this answer for days, partly out of protection, partly out of fear. But this was no longer just about her pain. "Yes," she whispered. "Sophie is your daughter." Mark closed his eyes, the truth hitting him like a wave. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" The words unleashed something Jessica had tried so long to bury, her fists clenched at her sides. "You weren't good to me, Mark," she said, voice tight. "You didn't care. You cheated. You left me empty, humiliated. I was already alone while we were still together." She paused, her voice trembling. "When I found out I was pregnant, I couldn't imagine bringing a child into that kind of pain." Mark's face broke, the weight of her words pressing deep into his chest. "I had the right to know," he said quietly. "Even if I was the worst version of myself, I had the right to try." Jessica's eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. "And Sophie had the right to a father who wouldn't put her second, like I was." The silence between them turned into a wall, a heavy, trembling wall, built from years of betrayal and silence. "I was stupid," Mark finally said. "Chasing numbers, success. I thought I was building a future, but all I did was burn down the only real thing I had." His voice cracked. "If I had known about her, I swear I would have changed everything." Jessica turned away, arms folded across her chest. "You can't know that." "No," he agreed. "But I can promise this now. I will not disappear again. I won't miss another day." He stepped forward. "I'm begging you, don't make me lose more time with her." Jessica hesitated, not because she didn't still hurt, but because she had seen the way Sophie looked at him, because she had seen the way Mark had looked at their daughter, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. "I don't know if I can trust you," she whispered. "Not for me, but maybe for Sophie." Mark's shoulders dropped, a quiet breath escaping him. "That's all I'm asking." Behind them, the apartment door creaked. Neither of them noticed. A small shadow slipped away, bare feet silent on the carpet. Sophie had heard everything. She had stood just out of sight, her small hands gripping the doorknob, her heart wide open. And now, with her tiny blue backpack in hand and her teddy bear tucked tightly to her chest, she walked quietly out the back door, down the fire escape, back into the city, not in fear, not in anger, but in search of the truth about a father she never knew she had, and two adults too late to notice that the most important listener had already left. Chapter 9, Rainfall and Revelations. Mark's footsteps echoed off the fire escape, each one laced with panic. The metal railing was slick from the falling rain, but he didn't care. His voice cut through the alley. Sophie, it's me, Mark." He paused, then corrected himself. You're dead." The words still felt foreign, like a truth he was only now beginning to earn. On the street, Jessica was breathless, her voice raw from yelling. "Have you seen a little girl, brown hair, about this tall?" Every head she asked shook no, until one man hesitated. "I think I saw a girl walking that way, toward downtown." That was enough. Jessica and Mark ran. The sky broke above them, the kind of rain that felt like grief. Cold, heavy, endless. "She heard us," Jessica gasped between breaths, realization dawning like lightning in her chest. "She heard everything." Mark didn't answer, he just ran faster. Sophie, the daughter he never knew, the girl he might already be losing. When they reached the main square, Mark saw her. Small. Still. Sitting on a bench in the rain, hugging her teddy bear like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Echoed again. "There," he whispered, then shouted, "Sophie!" Jessica's heart nearly collapsed. "Oh God, Sophie!" They ran to her. Her face was pale, soaked, her eyes red from crying. Jessica dropped to her knees. "Baby, are you okay? Are you hurt? Why did you—" Sophie didn't answer. She turned to Mark. "Why did you lie?" she asked. It shattered him. "I didn't know," Jessica said quickly, tears already mixing with rain. "We should have told you. I should have told you. I'm sorry." Mark knelt beside them. "I hurt your mom a long time ago," he said softly. "She was protecting you from me." Sophie's lower lip trembled. Are you really my dad? Mark didn't hesitate. Yes, I'm your dad. Her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. Why didn't you come before? Because I didn't know about you, but now I do, and I'm here. I'll always be here. Sophie looked between them, her small chest rising and falling fast. You're not going away? She asked. Mark touched her wet cheek gently. Never. And then finally, Sophie flung herself into his arms, sobbing into his chest. Jessica's knees gave out. She wrapped her arms around them both, sobbing quietly behind her daughter. For a moment, they were just a family, soaking, shaking, together. The rain slowed, like it knew the storm had passed. But then, Sophie pulled back, her voice sharp with fear. Are you going to do to me what you did to Mommy? Mark's chest tightened. No, sweetheart. Never. I can't erase the past, but I promise I'll never hurt you. She searched his face, then smiled, just a little. I always wanted a dad, she whispered. Mark swallowed the lump in his throat. And I always wanted a daughter, he replied. I just didn't know until I met you. Jessica saw it, the fragile magic of this moment. She reached out and took Sophie's other hand. Let's go home, she said softly. They walked through the wet streets, Sophie in Mark's arms, her tiny fingers curled in Jessica's. For the first time in years, the air felt a little warmer. Like maybe, just maybe, they were finding their way back. Chapter 10. The Promise of Ordinary Days. The apartment was dim and quiet as they stepped inside, soaked through and shivering. Jessica led Sophie into the bathroom, running warm water into the tub while Mark called the police to report she'd been found. Later, when Sophie was wrapped in a towel and tucked into bed, Jessica returned to the living room. Mark stood by the window, watching the rain roll down the glass. Thank you, she said softly. He turned, surprised. For calling the police? She nodded. And for finding her, for everything. There was a silence between them now, no longer sharp, just uncertain. Mark asked the question gently, what happens now? Jessica exhaled. I don't know. But Sophie needs stability, time. She's confused. I want to be in her life, he said. I want to support her, know her, be her father. Jessica turned to him fully. She deserves that. She deserves to have you. But me? I need time to trust again. Mark nodded. I understand. I'll prove it to you. Day by day. The next morning began a new rhythm. Mark arrived early with coffee and warm breakfast. He walked Sophie to school, picked her up, helped with homework. He canceled meetings, postponed business trips, and left his phone untouched when Sophie was around. Jessica watched it all cautiously, waiting for him to fail. But he never did. He sat through school plays, memorized the names of Sophie's stuffed animals. He learned how she liked her sandwiches and what made her laugh till she snorted. One Saturday, as Jessica folded laundry, Mark appeared with a folder. A new apartment, he said, opening it. 3 bedrooms. A yard, near Sophie's school. Jessica froze. Mark, you won't be living with me. The back unit's separate. You'd have your own space. So would I. But Sophie could have both of us. She stared at the photos. Light, space, peace. I'll pay my share, she said. Mark smiled. I never doubted that. When they told Sophie, her eyes sparkled. Are we a real family now? Jessica hesitated. Mark answered first. We're a family, maybe not the usual kind, but ours. The move was simple. Friends helped. Boxes arrived. And by evening, the 3 of them sat on the living room floor, eating pizza from the box. Sophie leaned into Jessica's side and whispered, It feels like home. That night, Jessica found Mark washing dishes. Without thinking, she picked up a towel to dry them. I was wrong about you, she said softly. Mark paused, looked at her. You weren't. I was the man you said I was, but I'm not anymore. Jessica nodded. She didn't say she forgave him. She didn't need to. She was still healing. But the wall was cracked. Light was getting through. Sophie had 2 parents now, not perfect ones, not a fairy tale, but real ones. And for once, that was enough. And in the end, she was never really alone. It wasn't a grand confession or a perfect ending that changed everything. It was the way he learned to be present, the way he showed up on rainy mornings with Sophie's favorite waffles, the way he listened when Jessica spoke, really listened, even when her words were clipped with old hurt, the way Sophie began to sleep with both arms wrapped around her teddy bear, and not under the bed, waiting for the storm to pass. They never labeled it. There was no proposal, no second ring. It was quiet days, safe days, shared groceries, shared silence, shared joy when Sophie came home with glitter on her nose from school projects. Mark didn't move into Jessica's heart in one night. He rebuilt a home brick by brick, the kind of home Sophie could feel even in her bones. And for the first time in years, Jessica allowed herself to rest, to trust, to believe that sometimes people really do change. And when they do, not for show, not for credit, but because they finally see what matters. That kind of love? It doesn't need vows or diamonds. It just needs a chance. Whispers to the viewer, if you've ever held on to pain longer than you wanted to, if you've ever wondered if someone could truly become who they were meant to be, if you've ever wanted to believe again, not just in love but in healing, then maybe this story was yours too. And maybe the next one, it'll go even deeper. See you there.